This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
Prime Big Deal Days is coming October 8th and 9th. Woohoo! Which can lead to involuntary deal squeals, like the infamous deal on a new massager squeal. Yeah! Save big on Prime Big Deal Days, October 8th and 9th.
Welcome to the Invest Like a Boss podcast.
I'm Sam Marks.
I'm Derek Sparts.
And I'm Johnny FD. We're self-made entrepreneurs who invest our own money and use modern technology to invest like a boss.
Join us each week for exclusive interviews with our network of modern investors, business owners, and multimillionaires to discover new ways to invest our hard-earned cash.
What is up, bosses? Episode 304 of the Invest Like a Boss podcast. My name is Derek Sparts. I got Sam Marks on the other end, and we're going to keep this short because we have an amazing guest on this podcast, and this is how it all ties in together. So Matt Buckley came on the show. Sam did an awesome interview. Let me get the episode number for you guys if you haven't listened to that.
It's 294. How can you forget?
294, Matthew Wiz Buckley.
It's been the most profitable episode probably in the last year or two. I would say comfortably for you and I, Derek. Don't you agree?
I'm going to agree with that. So a couple things came out of that. First of all, Matt told us about options, and he's like, why aren't you guys doing options? And Sam and I actually got the motivation to sit down and learn them and figure them out. And it's been going very well. And we will do an episode soon, I promise, on options.
Derek, I think Matt was physically ill when he realized how much money, and I was too, how much money that I'd left on the table over the last decade by just sitting on my stock portfolio and not trading options. Yeah.
But now it's real, because if I'm seeing what your options got you, Sam got a sick apartment.
Yeah. I'm enjoying it. And I love staying up and waiting for the market to open to trade a couple of options, man. I have to say, it's enjoyable.
I just got one. I just sold one this morning. It was great. I was at the airport lounge sipping on a drink, and I was like, you know what? This drink is free.
That drink might be free in terms of money, but I don't know if you checked this out yet, Derek. In this episode, we're going to talk about what that drink might be doing to your health and society at large.
Yes, so that's the other thing we learned in the episode with Matt Buckley. He brought up two companies specifically, Atai Life Sciences and Compass Pathways, and they were both founded by our guest today, Christian Angermayer. Now, these are both psychedelics-focused companies. Matt believed very firmly in the power of psychedelics. Sam has tried them out. We've heard many tale about that and very positive experiences on his end, I think, for the most part. And we're like, why don't we talk to the source of this? So this is how everything ties together. We got options. We got psychedelics. If you bought options in psychedelics recently, it probably didn't work out so well. But separately, these are great topics that we wanted to cover. So Sam and I will talk about options very soon. But on this episode, we're going to focus specifically on psychedelics. There's been a lot of things in the news with it. Buckley had kind of preempted that there's going to be a huge FDA decision on making them legal. And he was very optimistic that it would happen. If you haven't been following, they actually denied the first kind of, I don't know, was it MDMA, I think, for uses in treatment therapy. So that was kind of seemed like dead in the water, but we'll find out soon from our guests that that might not be totally the case. It won't be as bad as the press is saying. Christian is here to kind of talk about that, what happened there, the potential in psychedelics, and so much more. Sam did a deep dive with Christian.
Yeah. So, and you guys may have caught Christian recently, I think back in June, was on Joe Rogan talking mostly about the Enhanced Games. So he's also the co-founder of the Enhanced Games, which is a Olympics competitor, which has no restrictions or regulations across doping or enhancement supplements of any sort. But they also did touch quite extensively on psychedelics on that episode. And there's a lot of ways to introduce Christian. He's a pioneer in a lot of different ways. But here's what Forbes said. Meet the crypto pioneering, biohacking, psychedelics promoting billionaire who wants to reimagine the Olympics. On Christian's own website, he says, I'm dedicated to fighting the global mental health crisis, both through Atai Life Sciences as well through the mental health nonprofit Aurora. It's one thing to say it, it's another thing to do it. Christian is deploying literally billions of dollars into these initiatives to make society and our experience of the world better. So very pleased to have him on the show. Let's get into psychedelics and see if this might be a buying opportunity.
And Christian's brought a lot of fellow billionaires along with him to invest as well. We'll touch on that. Christian, he had that small little show with Joe Rogan, but now he's in the big leagues with Invest Like a Boss. So let's jump into this interview. Here's Sam interviewing Christian Angermayer. Hey, bosses, we're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. The show will be right back. If it's time to upgrade your business and get the best checkout on the planet, you should get Shopify. But just don't take my word for it. I've told you guys before how I use Shopify, but did you know that my buddy Johnny FD also used Shopify? Johnny, how did you utilize Shopify's resources?
So instead of me hiring a developer to fix my website every time there was an update and something would break, I just started using Shopify instead and it went out on their team. Nothing ever broke. Everything was updated seamlessly in the back, and I got to just focus on running my business as intended.
So if you want a flawless checkout and upgrade your business like Johnny did, you can sign up right now for a $1 per month trial period when you head to shopify.com/iLab. That's shopify.com/ILAB. Make sure that the iLab is all lowercase. You can upgrade your selling today when you head to shopify.com/iLab.
Christian, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me. Great pleasure.
Any excuse to go back in time to my first psychedelic experience is a good one. And from what I know about you, I think you probably share in that positive first experience.
Yes. No, I was very lucky, lucky in many ways, not just that my first psychedelics experience, which was 2014, so 10 years ago, was a great one. But also, I would say they're always a great one, especially when you know how to handle or how to make the most out of it. But I was actually lucky per se that I did it because I didn't want to do it. Like I have these sort of not crazy, but like unusual backstory, because most people come to psychedelics and look for something, healing or whatever. And with me, it was kind of the opposite or very different, because I didn't want to do it because I thought I don't need it in a good way. I was always and have been a very sort of happy person. So my general rule in life was I don't take any what people colloquially call drugs, because something is very right in my brain, luckily. So, and I was always like, let's not jinx it. So I've never drank alcohol. I've never taken cocaine or even tried cannabis or whatever. I did nothing. Like I do drink coffee. That's the only, and that actually I started very late because I'm still like, do I really need it? And then like, by a long story, friends convinced me to try magic mushrooms. And then, as I said, best experience of my life.
So you and Donald Trump are the only two people I'm aware of that have never had a beer before. That's amazing. So you ruled out all these other things, including trying alcohol, but you jumped at mushrooms eventually. So where was the divide that you're like, this one's okay, I'll try it, but this one is on the definitely not list?
And then, so before I started thinking even about mushrooms or any other psychedelics, I was just ruling out everything in general. So my view was like, okay, something is very right with my brain. Luckily, I'm always happy. Doesn't mean that I don't have a bad day, but I think I have a sort of a sound basis of happiness. And I also don't think I'm dumb. So I was always like, Christian, don't rock the boat. Yeah, you can be very, very happy with your brain. And then the first, there were two things. The first sort of, how I say, change was, or the first impetus for change was, I had a dinner in 2013. It was a birthday dinner, and friends. It's still like when you don't drink alcohol in our society, which is actually crazy that people push you so hard for it. It goes down over time because people kind of accept it and everybody knows, oh, Christian is not drinking. But still, once in a while, people make a joke. And at this dinner, they made a joke again. The host was like, oh, I've seated you at the dinner next to a very famous neuroscientist, and he can loosen you up a bit and can tell you that one glass of alcohol won't kill you. And I was like, guys, I am in science myself, in biotech. Like, yeah, it's about more like why? Like, because like I think it's a slippery slope in the thing. If you drink once, I know it wouldn't kill me, but then I know the social pressure is on. Like people leave me fairly alone because they know he's never doing it. It's not even for discussion. But anyways, so I was like, well, I'm always interested in the brain. I'm very happy to meet this friend of yours. So and the whole evening, I spoke to this guy. His name is Rainer Spannagel, very famous and professor. And big shout out to him because like he sort of brought psychedelics on my map. Yeah. So I was like, hey, let's go through all the drugs, by the way, like the ones who are perceived bad, not so bad, whatever, and tell me what they do. Like I was like, if I have a specialist in front of me, I always want to look scientifically at things. Like, so what does alcohol do in my brain? Why do people take it? What's kind of the upside? What's the downside? Yeah, what is cocaine doing? If I have you, tell me everything. So, and what he did, and by the way, I always say in every podcast I talk about it, if this is the one thing the listeners take out of it, that's the most important one, because he pulled up a chart, and everybody can Google it now, from a friend of his called Professor David Nutt. Yeah, he's a very famous neuroscientist here in the UK, and he had written a book about the harm potential of various legal, illegal, recreational drugs. And what this guy, David Nutt, did, which is game changer, he actually quantified what we colloquially call as risk. So if you and I are talking and you say, oh, I don't know, taking heroin is risky, which is true, but like then in order to compare it to something else, we would need to define what does this actually mean, risk. Yeah, we throw out that word often with no way to define or quantify it. So what this guy, David Nutt, did, he made a comprehensive sort of risk score and defined what does risk of taking drugs actually mean, from can you die when you take it, can you get disabled when you take it, long-term effects, do they go away, do you have also harm to others, like it's practically harm to yourself and harm to us and all of that. Yeah, and long story short, this is to date the most comprehensive analysis of the downside of various drugs. The outcome, and by the way, again, please, whoever is listening, Google it, David Nutt chart, because if you see it in front of you, it's much more impressive and hopefully a little bit scary, because I want people to be aware of it, is that alcohol by far is the most risky and vicious and negative drug in the world, closely followed by heroin, which is the second sort of worst drug. And then on the left, where the bad stuff is, comes everything you think about, like crack cocaine, whatever. Yeah. By the way, cannabis not that low risk as people think. Yeah, it has considerable risk as well. And then on the very right, practically literally zero risk, came all the psychedelics. Yeah, so this guy, the German guy, started saying, hey, by the way, so it's right that you don't touch alcohol. It's right that you don't touch all of the other stuff. But why don't you look at like LSD, magic mushrooms? They practically have no risk. And while I believed him, my answer to him was, but still, why would I do it? Like, okay, I believe you in the downside, and he was like, oh, by the way, in the 50s, and 60s, they helped curing mental health issues, whatever. Yeah, but I was like, I don't need it. Yeah. So, and it was part one. And then part two is that I have very dear friends, and they were actually telling me about the potential of psychedelics also since a long time. Again, I always ignore it because I was like, I don't need it. Yeah. And this kind of came together, and I would say I have a very spiritual view on life. Like sometimes I believe if you're just listening carefully enough, there are sort of these kind of hints or messages, whatever. So when we then a year later, and in that year between 2013 and 14, I had read a lot about psychedelics, what they did in the 50s and 60s, and all the research which was done, which by the way is very thorough. Like sort of practically everything this guy told me at dinner was confirmed. Like if done in the right circumstance, they have very low risk. Yeah, and they have a tremendous positive upside because they can potentially cure various mental health issues from depression and so on. 1 year later, I was in the Caribbean with these friends. They had mushrooms, and something told me, do it. Yeah, and that is sort of the long story. Did it. Single most meaningful thing. I cannot sort of say strongly enough how positive it was. And then I came out of the trip and was like, holy shit, if it's doing or giving this amount of positivity to me as a happy, healthy person, and totally see how it has the potential to really help all the people in need who really have a mental health issue. And that was then the start of me thinking, how can I make sort of a company out of that in order to bring all these substances, psychedelics, back into the medical realm.
Amazing. Going back, you mentioned we were talking briefly about the 50s and 60s, kind of leading up to the 1970, late 60s and 70s. But I've heard various opinions recently about what happened with with those laws and regulations. They all seem pretty consistent. Like, what's your view on what took place with the regulation of psychedelics back starting in the late 1960s, I believe?
Well, in the 60s, several things happened. So the research happened before 50s and 60s. And by the way, some of these psychedelics we bring back now, especially psilocybin, the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, they used to be a medication. By the way, exactly what we want to make them again, it was a medication you were supposed to take with a doctor. What then happened in the sort of end of 60s, early 70s is that the so-called hippie generation, they technically took it illegally because they did it outside of the medical realm, at festivals, whatever, which, to be fair, nobody really cared because everybody it was very niche, but also it's a good thing. Like, even today, like, if friends tell me, oh, on a weekend, I rather would take a little bit of psilocybin on an evening than alcohol, I would say scientifically, that's a good thing. You're doing something which is better. The problem was, there's always a fine line if people do it recreationally. In terms, I think it's much harder to abuse psychedelics than any other drug. But for example, you can produce accidents on psychedelics. Yeah, that's actually, when people look up the chart, which I just mentioned, there is a tiny bit of risk, and that's the risk that sort of, I don't know, you create a car accident if you're driving on psychedelics, whatever. Yeah. So there is that risk, but more importantly, in the 70s, then the hippie generation became political with the Vietnam War. So, and by that, accidentally, should have never happened, the psychedelic substances as a symbol for the hippie movement. And you can very easily see positively first how psychedelics have influenced the hippie movement with like peace, love, happiness. Yeah, that's exactly what psychedelics teach you. But because the movement became political, so became psychedelics. And then you had, even worse, you had sort of rogue actors like Timothy Leary, who then sort of even put more, like, say, oil in the fire and were like, oh, everybody should do it, and da-da-da. And that's, by the way, it's a very cautionary tale. I'm telling everybody today is like, let's not make psychedelics political, because there are some attempts to mobilize in the US politicians on both sides to shortcut things, whatever. And my view was always no, because it's very medical. Let's stay in the science world. Because politics is a risky game. And if you mobilize it too much, it can also burn you. But back to the 60s, what then happened is that Nixon, or some advisors of him, and it's actually well documented, and I financed a documentary which should come out soon about it, that Nixon and his advisors said, oh, how can we smear those hippies? And then some dumbass said, hey, let's just say they must be crazy, because you must be crazy if you're against our dear president. And why are they crazy? Because they take psychedelics. And they started really to falsify studies, fake them, whatever, to pretend that psychedelics have sort of a downside of making you crazy. All the urban legends started back then. Oh, some people never come back from a trip, and all of that bullshit. But unfortunately, it stuck. Yeah. And then there is a third component, which is actually the saddest one, well documented, was that the DEA, which is a big agency, was kind of about to be dissolved, because like, the DEA is still coming out of the prohibition of alcohol. And as it's often in politics, again, that's why I'm telling all my friends in psychedelics, let's stay away from it. There are so many non-rational, at least from an outside rational, from their point of view, it's very rational, sort of decisions made. And the people in the DEA were like, wait a moment, we are about to get dissolved, because why do you need a DEA if you have no prohibition of alcohol anymore? So they jumped on that and said, let's vilify psychedelics, because then we have a job again. Yeah, it was kind of sort of a job program for the DA as well. So many unfortunate things came together, which sort of happened to that completely wrong labeling of psychedelics. And maybe the fourth one is that nobody objected, because mental health was not an issue back then.
Wow.
And that has actually, if people ask me what has changed actually, by the way, we can debate that. Why wasn't mental health an issue back then? And why is it so big now? So clearly there is something in our world which makes us more likely to catch a mental health problem. Meaning you can also argue that maybe people didn't come forward with it. And I think it's both. I think in that time, I think there were considerably less people really having a mental health issue. And then those who had didn't really come forward. So it's two things combined. But long story short, there was no lobby for it. And psychedelics became illegal. So what is happening now, if we jump forward, what has changed? The two major things which have changed is that's the unfortunate one, and the one we're trying to sort of solve, is that that mental health became a major issue. Not just a major issue. Actually, if you look at the numbers, there is more than 1 billion people who have an official mental health issue. I say official because I believe the unofficial number is still much higher, because everything related to mental health is unfortunately still stigmatized. So I believe the true number is much higher, but already the 1 billion makes it the sort of most pressing, biggest problem in healthcare. So that is actually the negative reason why psychedelics kind of having a comeback, because people realized we have a real crisis and there is nothing else that helps.
Yeah.
There has been no innovation in mental health for the last 30 years. And we do know out of the 50s and 60s that psychedelics could be the solution. The second positive reason is, for the first time, and it just happened over the last, let's say, 10 years, I don't want to say we fully understand our brain, but we started to understand our brain much better. And what every regulator likes and wants to see is not just an explanation, I give you this drug and then this is the effect. That's obviously very important. Does a drug work? But they always want to know the mechanism of action. And you need to explain, by the way, what's happening. Why is this working? And in the 50s and 60s, they couldn't do that because they couldn't look into the brain. So in the 50s and 60s, all the psychedelic research was more observational from the outside. Oh, I give these patients this and this is happening. So now for the first time, we can actually build much more sound models and explain why psychedelics works. And these two reasons, so sort of the negative one, the sort of demand side, that we have such a big mental health crisis, and then the positive side that we sort of know much more about the brain and hence also how psychedelics work, that together allows what's happening right now, that renaissance of psychedelics as a medical.
This whole topic is so fascinating. There's the country of Bhutan that's always discussed and labeled the happiest country in the world. So I went there like 2 years ago. Have you been there before, Christian?
Unfortunately not, no. I have friends just going, but like I haven't been myself.
Yeah, I went there because I'm like, okay, what's up with the happiest country in the world? What's up? How are these people living? I went there. I didn't see any happy people. I saw all the guys were alcoholics. And I'm like, okay, what's happened here? And it's interesting to kind of theorize, but to me, it seems like they all got cell phones, because yes, they have a beautiful country. They have a very nice, content way of life. But I think what happened when they got cell phones, they all dress extremely traditional, and by modern standards, they're very, they're poor. And I think they just started comparing themselves and realizing, like, what am I wearing? Like, what is this life that I'm living? It has to be something like that, because something clearly changed in the last decade. And maybe in the West, it's been going on longer than that. But that's really interesting to hear you say, like, in the 60s, there really wasn't mental health issues. It's like, imagine a world like to get back there. That would just be like incredible.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I think there are several reasons which are all rooted in how our world has developed. Again, by the way, I want to say it's not that there were zero mental health issues, but there were considerably less. Yeah. Again, and most likely we didn't diagnose it either. But what are the reasons? Meaning, if we go on the non sort of non therapy, but like, where is it coming from? Like, I think one is definitely our phones. Yeah, and as you say, I think there's many reasons why our phones and social media and everything makes us sick. I think one of the most pressing ones is that permanent comparison to other people makes us sick. Yeah, and there is a great, cynically said, but there is a very telling rat model. Like, if you take two rats in a laboratory and put them in a plexiglass cage next to each other so they can see each other all the time, and one rat is a strong so-called alpha rat and the other one is a weaker rat, then over weeks the weaker rat, although the strong rat can't hurt it, they're never in touch directly, the weaker rat, just by permanently looking at a stronger, healthier version, is becoming actually depressive. So compare what tells us comparison is really bad. And the worst is that the part of our brain which is comparing ourselves to others is not realizing that most of the people we compare ourselves to are fake. Yeah. So you might think that if you go on social media that all the abs of the guys are, I don't know, airbrushed or made, yeah, or the boobs of the girls are fake, yeah. But the part of your brain which is like, damn it, like this guy looks better, this girl looks better, whatever, especially by the way to young children or young growing ups, the part which says, I'm weaker, I'm not me, that is actually this part doesn't say, oh, this is all fake. So this makes it even worse. And again, we had that in past decades and centuries, but you compared yourself within your village, yeah, or your social group, which was normally very similar. So yes, when you were going to school, when I was going to school, there were some kids who were a little bit better looking, some kids who were a little bit richer, whatever. But the deviation, the standard deviation was fairly small because still like in my village, whatever, it was kind of all the same people. So now the 16-year-old boy or girl is comparing themselves to the supermodels from LA. And it's just like, it's messing up our brain so badly. So that is one thing. Then the entire being sucked in this whole attention cycle is very bad. Then I think also like another problem in our time is not social media alone, is like I think we're living bottom line in one of the most awesome periods of all time, because that's what you said before. I deeply believe that at the end technology will create a better world, but we also have to acknowledge that it's sort of the time of greatest change we ever had in the shortest period of time. Like how much the world has changed in the last 10 years, compared to the last 100,000, whatever, it's insane. And we have to acknowledge humans don't like change. So that is maybe when you go to Bhutan, like they have been a society which was fairly unchanged for a long period of time. And actually, that is very good for our mental health. And this has been changed dramatically, like again, and it's changing every year more, and sort of the velocity of changes is increasing. And I think Bill Clinton had once this quote. He said, like, a lot of things negatively we observe in the world is actually just an impression or just a way where the people, what they really want to say, they're sitting in a roller coaster, and the roller coaster is going faster and faster, and the people are just screaming like, "Stop it!" Like, I want to get out of this roller coaster, But like it's turning faster and faster, and my belief is a lot of things we observe, especially extremism, both to the left and to the right, is kind of a scream for help of people who just don't understand the world anymore, and they don't see a place or their place in that world. But having said that, I think what is the most important thing to be happy, or one of the most important things, is to have purpose and to know your place in this world. So anyway, so there are many reasons, and this is why I think we need psychedelics more than ever.
So well said. I want to jump into Atai and the business and the opportunity, but just building up to that quickly. So 1970 was more or less almost 60 years ago. Was there just no progress in the space until this recent push, or was there, back around 2000 or before, was there other pushes to try to legalize things that just kind of sizzled and died?
Very little. Research never stopped. So it was made a Schedule 1. All these substances were made Schedule 1 drugs, how it's called, which is sort of the most restrictive form you can have. And practically it stopped almost everything. There were people like the scientist I met at this birthday dinner I said earlier, who still worked with psychedelics. But like back then, actually till let's say 5-6 years ago, doing research with psychedelics, which was still allowed, was a career killer. Now it's a career booster. Yeah, so I would say till round about 2015-ish, like so mid of the last decade, there was nothing, more or less. There was one organization called MAPS, which was advancing, though, mostly MDMA. And MDMA is not a psychedelic. It's always grouped into that a little bit. That what it has sort of in common with the typical psychedelics is that also MDMA was made illegal in that whole sort of counter war against hippies, and it's practically finding its way back. And MDMA does have a very promising as well property for mental health, especially for post-traumatic stress disorder. But yeah, So, but MDMA was done, they tried to move it forward, which was done by MAPS, but till again recently very unsuccessfully because the time was just not right.
Is that the August 9th ruling that you're mentioning?
Well, so MAPS had, your question was like, has there been research let's say 2015? So MAPS was there, but didn't progress. Yeah.
Got it.
And then with sort of the renaissance of the classical psychedelics, we are pioneering. Also, MAPS got a boost. Yeah. So they were sort of suddenly able, they are non-profit, to raise some funds for their studies. So MAPS did advance MDMA. Yeah. Unfortunately, they did not, and it's very important because it was a kind of a headline which people took as a negative for the entire sector. So what you're referring to on August 9th, the FDA rejected the approval application for medical use of that company MAPS, which then was renamed in Lycos. But it's very important. What I said before, MDMA is not a psychedelic, but they also did not reject MDMA per se. But unfortunately, the study MAPS, Lycos had done was very, I would say, flawed. Like there were very mistakes and whatever. It's a long story. My personal belief is they were just underfunded and were not able to pull off a real high quality trial. Yeah. And it's very clear, and it has nothing to do with MDMA or with psychedelics. The FDA cannot approve a sort of bad set of data. And I know a lot of people and the media kind of made it or portrayed it like a decision against MDMA, while the entire communication of the FDA was like, we totally see a value in MDMA and in psychedelics. And they actually have given several companies, including us, fast track designation and any other support. But they were also saying, but we cannot approve this data set, which was very, very flawed. But they should have, it was actually as hard as it sounds, because I was not happy about it, because I wish patients had access to MDMA already now. But like on the other side, just because I or people in general believe in something, it's not, if it were a cancer medication, you can't say, oh, FDA, the data is bad, but we kind of know it works, right? Like just do it. Like that's not how the FDA works.
It's hard to being outside the industry. It's hard to wrap my head around how the FDA works, because, looking at this stuff and having this experience and thinking of like the epidemic and the tragedy of just our veterans alone, and how, it's hard to imagine how this could not be helpful in a controlled environment, how it could be any worse, for instance, than the tragedy of what's happening with the veterans in the US and however many other sick people that could be helped by this. But it can't be completely political at this point. It has to be, FDA has to have some type of, reason behind the excessive diligence in their practice.
No, but the reason, exactly, by the way, and I was actually more worried, as I said before, like what MAPS/Lycos did at the end. Again, I would say fair try. I might have done the same, but they tried to politicize it and try to gather political support on both sides. My recommendation to the whole industry is don't, because like politics and the reason psychedelics had been politicized in the 60s and 70s made us end up here, meaning here that they are not available at the moment. So I think the worst sort of thing we can all do is politicize psychedelics. What I want to do, and this is why sort of I accept, again, I'm not happy about it, but I accept and I see why the FDA had to do it. We need to treat psychedelics for the sake of approval like any other drug. Because like also like exactly what you said, like, yes, I have very positive experiences. You have also very positive experiences. There are many people who have, but like we also need to acknowledge there are many people who don't know psychedelics or who might still be biased for the wrong reason, but like who still sort of are biased by the negative marketing campaign we had in the 70s. And the answer cannot be, oh, just try it out, or like, as much as I want to say that personally, the answer in science is we need to produce sort of impeccable data like you would do for any other drug. Just replace psychedelics and call it and think about cancer, whatever. Nobody would argue that any other drug should be approved on individual passion and political support. You would always say, no, why you have to produce the data, by the way, and as annoying sometimes that is, I mean, drug development is 25 years, like, yeah, the FDA process is the gold standard. Like, and it does ensure that, by the way, if you make it through, you have the right to claim like this stuff works, like whatever. So, and that's what we have to do for psychedelics. We shouldn't go any shortcut. We shouldn't, again, not try to politicize it, like just produce the data. And unfortunately, yeah, again, I wish it were different. The data set Lycos was producing was very, very flawed. I don't want to criticize them too much because I really like them. And again, I would have wished they worked. Yeah, but I think it's important to say that, not because I want to criticize them, because it shows it was not a decision against the drug. It was a decision against that specific data set. And MDMA will see hopefully success soon. And if nothing else, then we're going to get it done.
That leads us into kind of the state of the industry and where Atai fits into the puzzle and the overall landscape. I mean, what's your guys' niche, and who are the other big players that are working on psychedelics?
Where do we start? Meaning, I would definitely say that Atai plus Compass. So for all the listeners, sort of, we started two companies. Atai is the mothership, and then we span out Compass, which is now an independent listed company. Compass is focusing solely on psilocybin, the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, and Atai still is the largest shareholder of Compass, and then has all the other psychedelics, which from our point of view do make sense for medical use. So when I say we or us or whatever, I always mean both Atai and Compass. So my first sort of a little bit cocky, but it's the truth, because like we were the first one, by the way, for years, we were the only ones looking at that sector. And by the way, most people told me, this is crazy, don't do it, da, da, da. Yeah, my first sort of major mission was we need to recreate intellectual property and patents around these psychedelics, which, by the way, side note, I don't think in your podcast, but like sort of generally there were sort of people who sometimes said, oh, because this is kind of a holy spiritual, or these are kind of spiritual drugs, they should not be commercialized in a for-profit way. My answer was always like, that's the world we live in. By the way, I'm very happy about it because I think capitalism works. Like capitalism has its own flaws, but like in all the systems humans tried, capitalism is the one which has advanced humanity the most, has created actually the most good for humanity. So, and in any case, I'm always a fan to not overcomplicate things. And I'm like, look, I don't want to change, because some people said, oh, we need to change the FDA. Coming back to what I said before, some people said we need to change politics. And it was like, guys, good luck. That's going to be a 20, 30-year process. There are billions of people who need these substances now, as soon as possible. So let's do it in a given environment. And the given environment is that, what I said before, you need to do FDA clinical trials. This is very costly. Yeah, you can say very, very simplified, a drug, a single drug, and Atai is doing 7 of them, or has more, but 7 in late stage. You need overall, from day one to approval, round about 300 million. That's a very, very simplified number. So the only way to do that is, as in my point of view, a for-profit company who's able to raise enough money and so on. You just can raise money if you have patents and IP. So, by the way, it's weird. I'm always mentioning it in terms of psychedelics. You would never discuss that simple fact, how capitalism works, that you need patents, whatever, if you talk about any other thing. But like in psychedelics, people, I think it's still kind of at least partially debate. So I wanted to mention it. So why I'm saying that is that when we started Atai and Compass, our main focus was to have sufficient patents around all the substances, psilocybin, DMT, and everything we want to do, because otherwise I couldn't justify the spending on it. And by the way, we raised in total Atai and Compass almost $1 billion so far, and we're going to raise in the future more capital because we have the patents, whatever. Side note, again, just to give people the bigger picture, I deeply believe that was the problem of MAPS / Lycos, because they were non-profit, they didn't have any patents. So it's way harder to raise money non-profit. And I think they always had too little money. And that is the reason why their trials ended up so flawed. But having said that, to your question, long answer, I would say Atai and Compass together are the 2 dominant players in the psychedelic sort of biotech pharma world, because we had time, we had like 2-3 years of head start. All the other companies started later, where we were able to map out and patent out whatever we thought makes sense. Why I'm stressing what makes sense is there is, for example, and again, I don't want to name sort of, let's call it competitors. It's not even a right word in biotech, competitors, but like if you look at the substance LSD, LSD is the only substance we're not doing at Atai. And there is a reason why I personally believe in LSD a lot. The upside of it, the medical upside, it gives you a 12-hour trip. Psilocybin does practically the same, but it's a 4 to 6 hour trip. So if I look at the pragmatism or at the commercialization, why would any doctor use LSD if you have to have the patient for 12 hours, which by the way automatically means you're going to stay overnight. There is no way to squeeze a 12-hour thing into a day visit. Yeah.
Right.
And why would insurance companies pay for all of that? 6 hours more plus an overnight stay. This is all costs who are piling up. If you can have the same outcome with psilocybin in a 4 to 6 hour trip, which is clearly just a day visit to the therapist. So the two guiding principles when we decided which drugs we're going to develop was can we get sufficient patents on it, as I said? And then second question, does that respective compound make sense in sort of the given medical infrastructure? So that's why LSD doesn't make sense from my point of view, not medically or not from the results. I think the results are good, but like from an economic point of view, why 12 hours if you have 6? I actually believe, last sentence, that everything will go towards a 2-hour window. Because again, if I look at it pragmatic as an entrepreneur, there is already a kind of, I would call it semi-psychedelic on the market, which is Spravato from Johnson & Johnson. It, by the way, just got blockbuster status. So it's called it's meaning it reached a $1 billion revenue per year mark. And it's going to grow and grow. And for Spravato, you have to go to the doctor. Same model we want for our psychedelics. And you do the session while you're with your therapist, and then you go home. And Spravato, which is esketamine, takes round about 2 hours. So what is amazing, and there's this American saying, the pioneers take the arrows, meaning they need to do all the work, and the settlers take the land. There is now a proven sort of model already out there, proven in every way. Therapists know it, more and more therapists are doing it. So the infrastructure is there, the people are there, the insurance are paying it. So it's a very proven model. And we have several psychedelic drugs like DMT, 5-MeO-DMT, psilocin, which is a new version of psilocybin, which fit exactly in these 2-hour window. So long story short, give us another 2-3 years, and I think it will be obvious, what I believe already today, that sort of Atai and Compass together are practically the only major player in that world.
Gotcha. I'm very curious, and I've not spoken to anyone about this, so it's just ideas in my head of like the commercial viability of these products, because the range of accessing these products around the world right now varies significantly. My first psychedelic experience was in some guy's apartment in Barcelona. It was controlled. He decorated it like he was a shaman, and it was let's say the set and setting was very good, but this was a 50 euro type of experience. And I think he just grew his own mushrooms in his place. So I don't think that it'll get to that level in the US, but how do you see the products commercially evolving? Like, let's just say that the US market specifically, will these just be available in a controlled therapeutic environment with the supervision of some licensed practitioner, or do you think these become take-home, over-the-counter prescription drugs, whatever?
So, meaning I neither believe that it will get there. Meaning, again, you see all the sort of hesitation and sort of still from certain parts of both the medical world, society, whatever, hesitation and skepticism about psychedelics. So to say we're jumping forward now and somewhere in the next years there's going to be a take-home stuff is unrealistic, but it would also be, I'm very deeply convinced, it would be the wrong thing, because people might say, oh, Christian is saying that now because it's better for his company if we Atai kind of controls the market. But that's not the case. I deeply believe if you do the right thing, then you make the most money anyway. But I do believe that the right thing from a from an individual patient's point of view is the one of a controlled setting with psychological assistance with a therapist. And why I believe that, not just my personal experience with it, but also if I look into history, you mentioned, or we mentioned and talked about the 60s and 70s, which are clearly not a good example. Yeah, I got a lot of shit from the psychedelic community early on. I think now they start seeing what I meant is that I always said, guys, the 60s and 70s are not a role model. Yeah, the 60s and 70s are the sort of bad model and the reason why we ended up where we still now, that these drugs are not available. So let's not repeat the same mistakes. While if I go back the last 10,000 years, except of the 60s and 70s, psychedelics were always there. So they were always an important part of medicine, or earlier on of spiritual practice, but earlier on spiritual practice was medicine, like, yeah, when it was kind of intertwined. And every single culture, every single one, I've not found a single exception, psychedelics were highly regulated. You were just allowed to do it with a shaman together in a very strict protocol. And by the way, there were some famous psychedelic religions and cults like people still point to, but I'm like, look at them. They like take the Eleusinian mysteries. It was forbidden by death to do it outside of that very strict framework.
Wow.
So when I'm saying that I want them in a controlled, assisted environment, I'm actually standing on a 10,000-year-old sort of history where we humans have figured out how to do it. So there seems to be a logic why 10,000 years, this is not alcohol. People didn't take it every weekend, party-wise, whatever. It was always in this very, very strict sort of framework. And I want to recreate that. And how I always say, like, the shamans of our times are the doctors, the therapists. It just is a different name, but that's how it has been. And that's, I deeply believe, how it should be.
It's a great point, because the stigma that you're mentioning that started in the 70s, just about these things driving people crazy, it's very real. And it's what prohibited me from trying these until just recent, because there was always floating in the back of my mind, like, I'm going to go crazy. I'm going to lose my mind. You know, we've all had bad days before. A lot of us have experienced depression and almost like nightmare states of mind. And like the thought of getting stuck in that for a long time, or maybe perpetually, is so terrifying that a lot of people just never would try this. And we have to think of the people who really need this for treatment. You know, a lot of them are living in that world. In fact, my co-host Derek was mentioning that his dad was the veteran's got some PTSD, but you know, he's never going to go to the $40 experience in, you know, in Barcelona or somebody's garage. Like myself as well, I would have done it much earlier if I was going to a place with a licensed practitioner that I have to pay a premium, but you know, you go into it with much better belief and faith that you're going to come out of it with a positive experience. Do we know what they were taking in the Eleusinian mysteries? Has that been figured out yet?
I would say yes, because they found traces of ergot, and ergot is a natural kind of version or natural produced version of kind of LSD. So yes, so they most likely took LSD, but they could equally, like mushrooms, they were all prevalent, but like it was either ergot, LSD, or mushrooms. But by the way, you said some super important point. I just want to repeat them in sort of and relate them to Atai, because like sort of, again, the one reason is the historic one. I think history showed us these drugs, medications should be taken under guidance. Then exactly, by the way, I want to also make clear the whole negative PR, oh, you could go crazy or never come back.
Yeah.
This is 100% fake. Yeah. So we know it, like not in a single, like we have treated thousands of people in clinical trials. Not a single one of them got stuck on it or whatever. So that is a completely urban legend. However, what is true is that if people, especially, by the way, people who need it because they do it for a medical reason, like people who have depression, anxiety, addiction, PTSD, and what so on, the trip in itself can be what I like to call challenging. There is the colloquial word, oh, somebody has a bad trip, but like they're not really bad. Like, but sometimes the antidote to a depression or to a trauma is to, for example, relive the trauma and then be okay with it. So actually, even in my own, although I didn't have any sort of medical problem, but by the way, I always say, like, it's also like how we define depression, whatever, because like everybody of us, it's part of the human nature to have trauma, whatever. So it's not that just some people have it so bad that they develop sort of a clinically diagnosed issue, but I think all of us have issues. Yeah. So I had I would say I had two very challenging trips who then turned out, because I had the right guide, I had the right sort of setting, they turned out to be the most valuable one. But in these moments, I clearly saw the value of somebody sort of being by your side and going through with it. Yeah. So, and obviously people who do it for a reason because they want to solve a problem, yeah, the likelihood that they have, again, not a bad one, a challenging trip is higher, but even more important, they have a guide with them. So that is one thing why, again, already medically, for medical reasons, you have to have somebody with you. And then there's the other point you made, rightly so, is the costs. And there's a good sort of, not negative is wrong, but a good example why it doesn't work otherwise. There was always the Netherlands. When I started Atai, the biggest sort of critique I always got was oh, look at the Netherlands, because in the Netherlands, you can actually access at least mushrooms legally and can take them home and do it alone. Yeah. But if you look at the numbers of depressive people in the Netherlands, it's exactly the same percentage than all the other countries in Europe, although they would have access to a solution. And the reason is very simple. All the people who argue and say, this should be more liberal, people should take it home, whatever, are people who are fine. These are people who are going to Burning Man, and God bless them, because I think it's great. But they look at themselves and they're 1% of people who can afford travels to great places, and sometimes they sort of pay a shaman themselves, whatever. But that's not the 99% of people. If you are very depressive, you're not doing it on your own, you're not going to go. That's one. Unfortunately, it's one of the sort of the characteristics of depression, that you have no impetus, whatever. So what these people want, they want a normal doctor to go to. They want to get it paid by their healthcare insurance, because they don't often have the money. Yeah, and they don't want fancy stuff. And then I always say, and if people want, it's great. There's going to be a niche market. Yeah, and actually our success on the medical side is giving all these niche things like Burning Man, whatever, actually more credibility. So good for them. It's not at all because they always think we're in competition with them. And I think some people think in a year or two, I'm going to show up in Burning Man and say, hey, give me your drugs because I own psilocybin. Complete bullshit. It's a completely different world. Yeah, but I deeply believe that the people who need it for medical reasons both have to have a guide, because otherwise these trips can become also very damaging, and not because you would not come back, but just they can be mind manifesting. So if you go through a bad moment and you don't have a guide who's sort of positively guiding you, this can go the wrong way, and because it needs to be paid by the healthcare insurance.
Man, I can just perfectly attest to that, because the second time I did it, I've only done psilocybin twice. It was pretty dark and pretty heavy. It did turn out to be even more meaningful than the first one, which was all just kittens and rainbows. But yeah, I remember in that moment that I wanted to just reach out and basically hold someone's hand and talk through it. And they weren't there. I was blindfolded laying down and I didn't want to call out, but it would have gotten through that and probably turned it to a positive experience much quicker. Definitely a tremendous amount of value add to have that. Going into this is very interesting. I thought this because you also co-founded the Enhanced Games, which is just incredible topic to discuss on its own. But what's a more interesting or even complicated relationship, Enhanced Games and the Olympics, or Atai and Big Farm?
That's a good question. I would say maybe Enhanced Games and Olympics, although I don't want to be it like that. In both instances, I think actually we are very distinct from Atai Pharma. Let's go through in Atai and Pharma, I think people are always worried and say, oh, will Big Pharma, someone buy that? The reason is because Big Pharma has a really bad reputation. Yeah. And I think parts of that reputation, though, are conspiracy theories, which are just not true. Knowing Big Pharma, because we interact with them, both with Atai, by the way, we have discussions and with other companies. I think Big Pharma, if we want to call it like that, they're just very slow. They're very non-innovative, whatever, but they're not evil. Yeah. So with respect to psychedelics, we might need them, want them, because what they do have, which has a value, they have an infrastructure for rollout of drugs. So I can totally see that in the future, once some of our medications are approved in Atai and Compass, that we partner, not sell out to, but that we partner with pharma companies who have the broad infrastructure to roll these medications out quickly. Yeah. But that is sort of a very banal and sort of also non-risky or whatever people might think when you interact with big pharma. They're kind of bureaucracies, yeah. But you might want them. You don't need them necessarily. We could also build up our own sales infrastructure, but you might want them. Yeah. But that's it. Like they slowly waking up. Can I see that? Meaning, obviously, they technically could make a takeover bid for any of these companies. Like I'm still the largest shareholder, so they will definitely have to talk to me. And my belief is that we're doing it better as an independent company than sort of selling out. But I do believe that we might partner in the future, actually with various pharma companies on various of our sort of substances. And so coming to the enhanced games and the Olympics, it's a little bit more vilifying. The Olympics more vilify us than we do them at all. Like we just like saying we do our own thing. And like, I think on the side, we point out the weaknesses of the Olympics because like my view is the Olympics are a great idea if it would be done sort of properly as they claim it's done. Because like the problem is the Olympics are not clean. Like I think it's a great idea to have, and for all the ones who are listening and don't know what we're talking about. So the enhanced games I've started is practically a similar kind of setup like the Olympics with track and field, gymnastics and stuff like that. However, performance enhancing drugs, colloquially called doping, are allowed and endorsed. So we want to show at the enhanced games what the human body can do with the help of science. And again, it's just an independent new thing. I don't want to even be compared with the Olympics all the time. They do that more. Yeah. And I'm like, look, get your house in order. Like their own data, not our data, but the WADA data is that 44% of all track and field athletes have used performance enhancing drugs lately. I was like, look, that's the problem. Like if people are watching the Olympics, you can't really know other people really clean or whatever. Yeah. So I was like, look, they should focus more on themselves and get their own house in order. Yeah. We're going to focus on ourselves and like build a great sports franchise. If at all, the one thing I'm criticizing the Olympics for, because I think it's a disgrace, they're not giving any money to their athletes. Yeah. And if you look at the Olympics, they have billions of dollars, which somehow are sucked up in this bureaucratic monster. Yeah. And the one or the people who really make the Olympics, the athletes, don't get anything, literally zero. Yeah. And if you look at any other sport, it's kind of crazy. Like if you would say, hey, Formula One drivers get $10,000 or whatever, they would say, look, we are the stars. And I want to make the athletes stars of the enhanced games. And this includes that we're going to pay them a good portion of the revenues we're doing.
So Christian, can we talk a little bit about the state of psychedelic stocks? I know back 6 months ago, we had Matt Buckley on the show. We got really excited about psychedelic stocks, including myself, only because we think it's a good place to profit. But at least personally, these are companies I want to support, including your own, just through the mission that you guys are trying to put together. But nevertheless, stocks are beat up quite considerably now. What do you think the state of them is and what's the future potential?
So, no, as you said, I mean, first of all, but that shouldn't be the only thing. I want to deliver also returns and profits to our shareholders. But yes, it is sort of a valuable thing to support Atai and Compass because I think positively we're doing something great. Why did psychedelic stocks not perform so far, including our own ones? Like Atai is a very beaten down stock. So by the way, side note, yeah, whoever wants to read more, if you go, like I have a Substack and I published a lot of posts and pieces about why psychedelic stocks are trading down so much but what is the potential going forward. So you find it under my name, Christian Angermayer Substack, and the same on LinkedIn. I'm always posting all my blog posts on Substack and LinkedIn or Twitter. That's another way to find me. But what happened is like, first, biotech as an industry is in a terrible state right now. I think we're at the turning point. That's the good news. But biotech overall, and especially small cap biotech, went down brutally because it's very negatively correlated to interest rates, which to a certain extent makes sense because, like, obviously, how do you value companies? With a discounted cash flow. Biotech is one of these industries where the cash flows are further out in the future because we need to invest first and then sort of come to the commercialization phase. So meaning a change in interest rates actually justified that biotech stocks had to go down a bit. But what has happened is that the biotech industry as a whole came from a generational high after COVID. Then interest rates went up very quickly, and that put so much stress on the entire system that practically, I don't know, would it be had warranted that Atai went down 30%, 40%? Yes, for sure, just because of the math with DCF, whatever. But then when something like that happens, and it happens to all the biotech stocks, then this puts so much pressure on a whole industry that you suddenly see funds being dissolved. People are selling not because they have to, not because they want to sell, but they have to sell. They get liquidated. So you go into this complete sort of negative spiral. And that was actually dragging down, again, all biotech stocks, from my point of view, much more than fundamentally warranted. So you can simplify it, say, we went from a generational high, which had definitely some exuberance. We went to a completely depressed state. So by the way, my general view is that biotech is the asset class as a whole, not just Atai, which has one of the biggest potentials in the next 12 months because interest rates are turning. Yeah. So in general, I would give sort of the advice, if you want to call it like that, look at biotech. I think if we talk again in a year from now, biotech will have been one of the best performing asset classes. So in that downturn, everything which I think is great for Atai and off Atai was actually kind of a disadvantage because Atai is novel. I mean, we talked about like the whole time now about how we're changing the paradigm, how psychedelic drugs are seen and brought back and whatever. And in good times, novelty is always a bonus. In bad times, I mean for the sector, novelty is bad because then people are like, okay, if I buy anything, I'm going to buy like a very traditional company, not like a very novel company like Atai. So what is our advantage long-term? Short-term turned into our disadvantage. Then also Atai is very diversified. Again, something I'm very proud of, which I told before. We have all the psychedelics that make commercially sense, but that's 7 of them. Yeah. In bad times, people like more like a one drug company because it's more like handy and more like easy to analyze, whatever. So again, something which will become an advantage again in these markets was a disadvantage. And then maybe the biggest sort of draw on psychedelic stocks, which I totally do not agree with, is that many market participants believe that the rollout will take much longer than we anticipate. Meaning, I think there is nobody who really thinks that our drugs will not be approved, which, by the way, already makes our valuation crazily low. If you think that the market consensus still is, and I think it's right to say, we know so much about these substances. Again, if we do it properly, not the negative Napster example, but if we do it properly, this should result in an approval over the years of all of our drugs. That was always my opinion. And I think the market doesn't disagree. Where the market seems to disagree is then how quickly will doctors and patients accept that new paradigm. So if I talk to big biotech investors or especially to pharma people, they're like, yeah, but it's going to take years till the people change their opinion, I mean. And there I have a completely different, much more bullish sentiment because the fact that we're doing that podcast and the fact that there is a Netflix show, How to Change Your Mind about psychedelics, and the fact that practically at any dinner I am, or what I want to say is psychedelics have already arrived in society. Like people are talking about it. And not just that, the good thing is, and you are actually a good example, and I'm a good example, the good thing is everybody who has been helped by psychedelics becomes an advocate. And by the way, I've never seen that with any other drug, and especially not in mental health. I've never met anybody who said, you know what, I just went on Xanax and it's awesome, you should do it. No, because it's shit. Yeah. So, but everybody who's done psychedelics in a bigger or smaller way, but everybody wants other people to be helped as well. So I think investors and especially pharma companies are completely underestimating the kind of virality and the pull and the demand which is already there. And when we are approved, psilocybin first of Compass, I think we're going to extremely positively surprise people, investors, everybody, how quickly these medications will be rolled out. And that means how quickly we're going to make huge revenue. So long story short, Yeah, by the way, I'm obviously super biased. I still own more than 20%. I'm the founder. That's my baby. But with all the knowledge I have and with all the sort of thing I can say, I think Atai at the moment, you're not just doing something good, but it's a generational investment opportunity because I deeply believe we IPO'd at 15. Now we're trading at 130, which is crazy and I think exaggerated low. Atai and Compass are some 20, 30 billion market cap companies in the making. We're trading at 200 million at the moment market cap. So there is a lot of room to grow in. So I do believe it's a great investment.
Yeah. So interest rates to reverse the current trend. Are there any other dates that are coming up in the next 12 months within Atai, Compass, or the industry that could also lead to a significant pop in biotech?
Yeah, I mean, interest rates are the key because we need, in order to shine as an individual company, we need that sentiment change, and we're going to get it. Meaning, I think that's now, I believe in it, but I think it's also kind of a commonly accepted in the meantime fact that interest rates will start coming down. And by the way, my personal belief is they're going to come down now quicker and harsher than people believe. I think the Fed kind of did the same mistake. They waited too long originally to increase them, but now they kind of waited almost too long to reduce them. So I think the pendulum is swinging the other way. But that we need a change in sentiment, but I think that's going to happen. Kind of it started very gradually. I think if the MDMA headline hadn't been negative, again, has nothing to do with Atai, but the headline suggested that, I think Atai and Compass would already trade much higher. So that is the macro picture. And then on the micro picture, and again, if people go on my Substack or LinkedIn or Twitter, they're gonna find that information as well. We're gonna have like 5, 6, 7 major either readouts or trials starting, and that's catalysts, which I think will hopefully drive the stock. And I think the most important catalyst will be Compass phase 3 data, which are guided to come out end of the year, early next year.
It seems like you guys are mostly focused on the US. Are there any other markets that you're actively trying to clear products in?
No, we're doing Europe at the same time. So it's always US and Europe at the same time, which is then kind of the 2 biggest markets in the world.
Yeah. Now, if investors are interested, they can buy Atai and Compass separately, but if they buy Atai, they're also getting a piece of Compass. Is that correct?
Exactly. Look, Atai is the one company where I say if you wanna, it's almost like we're opposite operating company, but it's kind of an index fund because you literally get all psychedelics in one company, which makes from my point of view commercially sense. So which is like MDMA, not a psychedelic, but we have it, psilocybin, then a new version of psilocybin, psilocin, DMT, 5-MeO DMT, and ibogaine. So again, I'm super biased, but I think Atai is the one stock to own.
That's great sharing. One final question before we wrap up, Christian. I think Peter Thiel is involved, and can you talk a little bit about that and any other strategic investors that are involved in the companies?
Well, we have Peter is a dear friend and great investor. He was actually in since really our very first round. The same for many other great investors, like so. Great strategic investor who hopefully knows what he's doing, but also believes in the value and sort of beyond sort of the financial side, believes in the necessity for new mental health treatments.
Yeah, awesome. Well, it's been a lot of fun to catch up on the state of the psychedelic industry. It's high, and all of your incredible works. Again, pat you on the back for just the mission of what you're trying to build and bring to the world in various different ways, even outside of Atai. It's great to follow your story and to host you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. And we can definitely check in again next year whenever there's news. Would love to come back.
Amazing.
Hey, bosses, we're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. The show will be right back.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
Looking to invest? Start your journey by exploring exchange-traded funds with Global X ETFs. Exchange-traded funds, or ETFs for short, create baskets of stocks, bonds, and other assets that you can buy in a single trade. Global X specializes in ETFs that track emerging trends, like the rise of artificial intelligence, as well as strategies aimed to generate income potential. Visit globalxetfs.com to discover how you can get started.
Okay, great interview, Sam. I want to know, first of all, Christian is obviously very ambitious, as he should be, on these getting passed by the FDA. But do you think a year from now, we at least have one hurdle cleared to the pathway to getting these legalized in the United States, at least?
I think hurdles are being cleared all the time, but will the big hurdles be cleared? I don't know. It's very difficult. You know, when we went back to the Buckley episode, I was just so like, this is for sure going through. But the more that I learn about the FDA and their processes and procedures, and also the politics behind it, who really knows what's going on, you know? All I can say is, from a first person point of view, you look at a couple different measures. One, you look at the experiences of people that are in controlled environments, and they're overwhelmingly extremely positive for both people that are in good states of mind and people that are in bad states of mind. And then you look at the mental health issues that, frankly, they're all around the world, but primarily in the West and probably predominantly in the USA at this point. And like I touched on with the veterans, and if you go back to the episode with Matt Buckley, we talk a lot about this in detail. But if you just look at those two things, it's hard to find a scenario where you say this will not be approved for therapeutic uses administered by a clinician in a controlled environment for people that need it. So that's all I can say. It's all I can say. Whatever's happening behind the scenes with the FDA, I have no idea, and it's not my territory. It's not. I can't even comment on it because it's so out of my realm of expertise. But if you look at the big picture of what the mental health crisis and then the power and effect of these medicines, then you have to say in the fairly soon future, these should be available.
And I think Christian is giving the US government a little too much credit on the speed at which it can move.
Yeah.
Now, as much as he doesn't want to be political and he's telling everybody to keep it out of politics, which I think is very smart, it's unavoidable these days. And right now we're in an election year, a huge election year. So nothing is going to get passed between now and November for sure. And then depending, actually president-wise, no matter who wins, we're going to have a new president. So that's not going to happen until January, and then we'll have a new Congress as well, and the parties could swing that way. So at the very earliest, nothing's going to happen until January at least. So I don't think there's any rush to run out and buy these stocks today, because I don't see anything happening in the next few months. But maybe next year, it would be great if that happens. I think he's thinking like an entrepreneur, where I want this done and I want it done now, and how do we figure it out? But the government doesn't run that way, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So it's going to be years. I think there probably is very promising data on this stuff, but it's going to take a long time. As far as Europe is concerned, he said they're trying to do that at the same time. I can't speak to them, but the US it moves at a turtle's pace. I do like the fact that he's not like, hey, we want this available in every single store, kind of like weed is now, where it's just like you just pop in and it looks like the Apple store. And then you can just pop one on the corner and trip out for the day. So I like that he wants it to be therapeutic, have a doctor available. He also said the same thing about the enhanced games too. Like, the athletes need to be monitored by a doctor if they're using steroids and things like that. Like, it can't just be anything goes. So I do like that aspect, even though it may be the less profitable one in the long term.
So yeah, I think we all know anecdotally the causes of the issues, the mental health issues in the world right now. But I can say this, I'll make a very big and profound statement. I think mental health is the worst thing in life, in the world. It's worse than racism. It's worse than poverty. It's worse than war. And you might say, oh, it's easy for you to say because you're not really a victim of racism. You're not fighting in a war and you're not poor. But look, you can have all those things and all the other bad things in the world. But if your mind is strong and positive, if you're in war, if people are racist against you, if your mind is strong and positive, if you're poor and your mind is strong and positive, those things don't matter. They don't, because everything is about our inner experience.
I think external forces versus internal, there's a lot more weapons to fight the external than the internal, at least as of now.
Yeah, all the outside stuff is just fuel in one way or the other for our inner experience. But you can also be the richest person in the world, have everything you could ever want. If your mental health is poor, you're living in a literal nightmare. So this is in my opinion, battling mental health is the most important thing in the world. There is nothing else that comes close to it, because you can solve all these other things, but if you don't solve mental health, then there's just too many people living in a literal nightmare. You can have people that are poor in various parts of the world you travel. There's people that are poor. They're pretty positive and upbeat. So there's not really a problem there to solve. But where there's mental health issues, there's suffering. And where there's suffering, we need to put a lot of effort and priority into resolving that.
That's why I like Christian's kind of resolve to keep it to the medical sense, like you're diagnosed with an issue and we're going to utilize this properly. Because one pushback I have on this stuff is I've had some friends recently, he mentioned the hippie movement and they would go to festivals and take all this stuff and just trip out for the day. Well, that's actually happening with a lot of people now too. There's these giant festivals going on everywhere. And I got friends that have been like sucked into this stuff and they're taking these pills and everything and at festivals and things. And there's people in my life that I've had to like separate from, where like I don't want to be around that world, because to me they've changed. When you use this recreationally, or you're using it like every weekend just to get high or have a good time or whatever, I don't know. People have changed. I don't know if it's like you've changed for the better, but you're not doing it every weekend. You said you've done it twice now. It's like, it's different than a regular user. I guess it's the same thing with an alcoholic. You know, if you're with someone and you have drinks every once in a while, you're having fun, but if they're getting hammered every single night, you don't want to hang around that person.
Yeah, it's very true. Well, this chart, I think you're going to post a chart in the show notes, guys. We have a chart on all the different, say, substances, drugs, and they have a harm score. So there's been a harm score that's applied to these, kind of going from 1 to 100. And it will shock you. If you haven't seen this before, you look at it and you'll say, no way, because alcohol in terms of a harm score to yourself and society is by far the most harmful of any of the substances I'll just name them real quick. Most harmful is alcohol. A not too close second is heroin. Followed by crack cocaine, methamphetamine, cocaine, tobacco, meth, amphetamines, cannabis, benzos, ketamine, going down to ecstasy, LSD, and then mushrooms. Mushrooms is basically let's call it a 6 out of 100 score. Now, I'll just say the experiences of mushrooms are very, very extreme in a lot of ways. So if you took a bunch of mushrooms and you went and drove a semi truck down the highway, that is very dangerous for yourself and society. So I think this, this chart needs to be taken in context, right? It's like if you have 1 cup of wine, there's almost no harm in that, right? Like, yeah, it does lower your inhibitions, and you shouldn't go drive a car. But it's all about dosage, right? And environment and context. So this is an idea. This chart, I think, gives you an idea of like large scale use and the impact on society. But obviously it matters.
I think some of this is availability wise too, because obviously alcohol is the most available drug on anything on this chart across the world. But it's shocking when you see that, you're like, oh, it's bad for you, but that's only 10% of the danger. The rest is, does it affect your community? This impacts crime, family problems, loss of relationships, and things like that. It's not just, is it bad for you? It's bad for the entire community. When you put it in that sense, alcohol is pretty scary. Even if it wasn't number one, the percentage wise is the damage it does to others is far greater than it does to even yourself. Let's talk about investing side. I mean, he was very open about he's not happy about the stock's performance, but also brought up that other, biopharma has also been underperforming. So he did bring up a good point that he said, when the sector is underperforming, people are going to shy away from novelties. I would consider both Atai, that's ticker symbol ATAI, and Compass, CMPS is the ticker for that. Those would be novelties right now because they really are unproven, as opposed to your other, biopharma companies that have approved drugs and things like that. So I see why people would pull out their money. And I also see the point he made when he said these big hedge funds are under pressure and they might still believe in the company in the long run. But when you have short-term people breathing down your neck, you have to cash those out.
Yeah. So right now the market cap of Atai is close to 200 million, which based on the clinical trials they're running, they're investing more money in the previous clinical trials and the upcoming clinical trials than the entire valuation of their company,
which is wild.
And I think that's why Christian was saying this is crazy.
It did IPO back in 2021 at a valuation of 3.2 billion. So it's down 94% in 3 years.
And if they're successful in the long run, I think he mentioned that these companies could easily be a 20-30 billion dollar company. I think that takes into consideration getting multiple clinical approval on multiple other drugs, not just one. So this could be like a phased success where you have one or two, but it's not like a full commercial rollout or full commercial viability of the company. But this stuff's really important. I'm probably down since the Buckley episode across all my psychedelic investments. I think I made 5 or 6 after that show. I think I'm down probably 30%, but it's a relatively small amount of money for me. I bought some options. I picked up some shares. I think I own MindMed, Compass, Atai outright, and then I own options on a handful of other ones. But this is, for me, this is like a feel-good investment. It's something that, if this works out, it's going to be a double feel-good where like you kind of help support these companies get through and also make a bunch of money on it. So I think it's a great cause, and we'll see where it goes. But I'll be very disappointed if this does not get passed in the US and people do not start getting help.
Yeah, I mean, Atai alone, if you throw some money in it could be a 10 bagger just to get back to the IPO price, which is pretty awesome. So view this as a lottery ticket, I guess, if you are invested in this. If you're interested in following psychedelics, I kind of like just buying stocks that maybe I'm not super into the company, just throw a few bucks in them because I like to see them in my account. I don't know if you do that, Sam, but I like to like see that ticker. I'll put a few bucks in it just so I can keep an eye on that company because I'm always curious about, how things work or if it's a sector that I'm interested in. So even if you just buy one share, you could spend $1.50 on Atai right now. And then that way, when you're looking at your account, I know everyone says, don't look at your account. Let's be honest. We look at them multiple times a day. So it's kind of like a vision board for your mind. So if this is something you are interested in, I would say just seriously, buy one share of Atai. It costs $1. Put it in your account. You're going to see it every day. And you go, oh, I wonder what they're up to today. Or you want to check news on them. I promise that you will keep a lot closer eye on a company if you're interested in it, even if you're not ready to invest. So I think I'm going to do that just to kind of have fun with it. I'm not going to throw the farm at it, but I'll throw a few bucks in there. And I do like Atai over Compass because he mentioned Atai is the biggest shareholder in Compass, so you're kind of essentially buying both.
Yeah, I agree. That was good. I did not know that. Like I own both Atai and Compass stocks after the Buckley episode, and I did not know the relationship. So in closing, Derek, have you done any psychedelics yet?
I haven't.
You haven't?
So I don't know, Sam. I'm like on the fence. Because I have the shady things like I was telling you. I know some people that do them and they're like, I got the hookup, I can give you the stuff. And I'm like, I want the right environment. I don't want to just take it and freak out because I think you have too. Even like cannabis, sometimes I'm like, I don't know what I'm taking and this could go bad. And then that just feels like next level bad to me. Even though if I'm looking at this chart that we're going to post, it shouldn't be as bad.
Well, Derek, I'll just float something here on the podcast and mention publicly that psychedelics is not for everyone. And in some countries, it's illegal. So I'm not condoning this. But the place that I did my 2 experiences, Barcelona, I'm planning to fly back there in about 3 weeks.
Okay.
And seeing as this was such a remarkable experience for me, I would like to offer it to you, sir. That would be...
Well, I'm going to be in South America in 3 weeks, so we're going to have to wait a little bit longer.
When do you get out of there?
The end of September, I'll be back.
Okay, so yeah, my offer stands. I'll fly you from California to Barcelona, and we will do the experience together in Barcelona, and you can stay with me for a few days.
Okay. You gotta send me a little bit more info. I just gotta... It's like... I don't know. I'm weirdly nervous about it. I don't know why.
Derek.
I'm weirdly nervous.
On the spot.
I don't know.
Don't freak out.
Something about it still freaks me out. And I think other people feel that way too.
It does, man. The stigma that Christian was talking about on the episode, it's seriously ingrained in our heads. And
that is a worry for sure.
And it was the same for me, man. I almost canceled like 5 times in the week leading up to it. And the day I went, I'm like super anxiety. I'm like, oh man, I'm going to fry my brain and I'm never going to be the same.
I will say if I get on the plane to go to Barcelona, I'll do it. It's kind of like going to the gym. Get me in the car, I'll go to the gym.
Right.
But like if it was just on the street and like, oh, you could go anytime and just pop in, I'd be like, I would probably walk up to the door and just turn around and be like, I gotta go back. But if I get on the plane, I'll do it.
All right. Well, no pressure, but a little pressure. No pressure, but seriously, here's some pressure. You should come. All right. Great episode. Christian, thanks for coming on the show. And guys, let us know what your thoughts are with these psychedelic stocks. Chat it up in the Boss Lounge or in Patreons. We'll have more content, especially for you guys there.
Yeah. And if you are a Patreon, you heard this episode a week ago before everybody else. So we like to put some stuff early in there. Sam and I are due for a little Patreon exclusive. We had a kind of a little time off during the summer, and I think we all needed it. So we're going to get back on track with regular episodes and really hitting that Patreon content. But if you've never signed up for Patreon, I think there's like 200 posts in there. So if you just spend the $5, you're going to get instant access to like hours and hours of content and tons of stuff. So check it out. It's investlikeaboss.com. Click become a Patreon. You can sign up for as low as $5 a month, and you help support the show so we can bring you more episodes with awesome guests like Christian.
Yeah, and you get to help us create the questions and the content that we're going to ask guests like Christian on the show. So every time we have a guest on, we post the guest before in Patreon. We'll let you guys ask questions. A lot of times we get those questions asked and answered during the episode.
And the last thing before we get out of here, I forgot. There's a new feature. If you're listening on Spotify, there's a little poll underneath. You can tell us if you invested in Atai or Compass. I'll put that down below. And you can also leave comments now. Just make sure they're positive. Otherwise, I'm probably not going to allow them, or I'll write you something really snarky back.
Fair enough.
Wrap it up, Sam.
All right, guys. We'll catch you all in a couple of weeks in the next episode. Until then, see you in Patreon.
Thanks for listening to the Invest Like a Boss podcast. Join our mailing list at investlikeaboss.com to get exclusive access to our insider investment portfolios and our private members forum.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends and leave us a review in the iTunes store. It helps more than you know. See you guys next week.